Welcome to a WPTZ News Channel 5 special presentation. WPTZ presents the New York 21st Congressional District Debates, live from the SUNY Valcor Conference Center.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm WPTZ's George Mallet, and I'm joined by Stephanie Gorin and Stuart Ledbetter. I do want to take a moment and thank SUNY Plattsburgh for providing us with this great venue for tonight's debate. I also want to take a moment and thank all of our candidates who are here tonight. That is Aaron Wolf, Elise Stefanik, and Matt Funicello. They're here to help us defend democracy, and we sure appreciate it. We've got a lot of topics to get to tonight, and we're going to get right to it with opening statements, and we begin with Elise Stefanik.
Thank you much to WPTZ for the opportunity to participate in tonight's debate. I also want to take a moment to thank Congressman Bill Owens. While Congressman Owens and I may disagree on certain issues, I commend Congressman Owens for his bipartisanship, his constituent services, and his public service representing this district. For the viewers watching tonight, my name is Elise Stefanik, and I'm proud to say that I was born and raised in upstate New York. And I grew up in a small business family where I learned how challenging it is to create jobs in today's economy. I was the first member of my immediate family to have the opportunity to graduate from college, and I worked for 6 years on common sense public policy in Washington. I chose to move home to the North Country to help my family's small business grow, and last August I announced my candidacy for Congress. I'm running for Congress because Washington is broken, and it is clear that we desperately need new ideas and a new generation of common sense bipartisan leadership to focus on creating jobs and helping our North Country economy grow, to stand up for our North Country farmers, to protect our constitutional liberties, especially our Second Amendment rights, and to fight on behalf of our servicemen and women and veterans. I'm excited to be here today, and I thank my opponents for joining us.
And now let's have Matt Funicello make his opening statement.
Thank you very much, George. Thank you, WPTZ. Thank you, fellow candidates. My name is Matt Funicello. I'm running for Congress as a Green. I was born in Wilton, which is in District 21. I was raised here and also in Ottawa, Ontario. Came back to live permanently when I was 19 years old. Started a business with my brother that is in the district. I actually work with one of my brothers who is still with me at the bakery that we run. Basically, my entire family lives, works, plays, hunts inside this district. I'm native, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Essentially, I have been an employer for about 20 years. I employ 35 people at this point in time who also are members of the district. I am advocating for three very simple things, and that is single-payer health care. We already pay for health care in this country with public money. Why don't we have it in the working class and middle class? I'm advocating a higher minimum wage of $15 an hour. If we elevate workers, we can fix my third issue, which is corporate welfare, which is we will not pay the subsidized payroll of Walmart and McDonald's. Thank you.
And we've got one more candidate, Aaron Wolf.
Thank you, George, and thank you to WPTZ, and thank you again to my fellow candidates. It's a great pleasure to defend democracy with you both. My name is Aaron Wolf, and it's an incredible honor to be here. I have had a home in Elizabethtown, New York since 1968. Over the years, I've helped build trails in the area. I've served on community and conservation boards. I've helped sell and distribute the products of local farmers. I've produced and edited my films from Elizabethtown. And I've also proudly worked with both Republicans and Democrats to help save, last year, 10 small-town movie theaters. It's the kind of bipartisan effort that I think characterizes this district and characterizes my view of the world. It's also something that I think Congressman Bill Owens would be incredibly proud of, and he and I are kindred spirits, and I think we think a lot about how to work across the aisle. That's why I'm so proud to have Bill Owens' endorsement. I think to fix the dysfunction in Washington, we are going to need that kind of spirit. Shared responsibility, community values, and hard work, the very things that I learned growing up in the North Country. Good timing.
Well, thank you all for your opening remarks. And now for the first round of questions. My fellow panelists and I are going to be asking these questions. All three candidates will get a chance to answer. They will each have 1 minute to answer the question. And we're going to begin with jobs and a challenge. Clinton, Franklin, Jefferson, and St. Lawrence counties all have unemployment rates above the current national average. Can you give us at least 2 key things you want to do to grow jobs in the area. And I want to be very specific here. We want to hear what you will do, not why it's the president's fault, not why it's Congress's fault. Give us your ideas. Mr. Funicello, we will start with you.
I will essentially advocate for 2 things, and one of them will be a green jobs program. We will look at the need for energy independence, and dependence on fossil fuel currently needs to be altered to renewable, sustainable energies. How are we going to do this without federal subsidy? And the answer is we're not. So we need to have a voice in Congress that is actually going to stand up and say, we have people who are unemployed in the Adirondack Park and in Congressional District 21. Why are they not making photovoltaics and small manufacturing? Why are we not rebuilding wind farms and solar infrastructure and hydropower within the Adirondack Park? The second thing that I will do is I will elevate workers. I've already said that in my opening statement. I'm advocating for a $15 living wage, and what that leads to is wage-led growth, which means small businesses will prosper because workers who live in their communities have jobs and health care and are able to spend that money right away where they live. That benefits the economy, and it allows small business to hire more workers. We're the biggest employer in the United States of America.
Elise Stefanik, same question.
Jobs in the economy is overwhelmingly the top priority as I talk to voters all across this district. It has become clear that President Obama's economic policies have failed, and I do want to put forth common sense solutions to encourage job growth right here in the North Country. One way we can do that is by pursuing fundamental tax reform. Small businesses and hardworking families are paying too much in taxes. I support throwing out the tax code and starting from scratch to build a common sense tax reform that encourages small businesses to hire additional people, but also encourages hardworking families to save more of their money and invest in future generations. Another issue which is related to jobs in this district is health care costs. They're rising under the Obamacare, which was a partisan piece of legislation voted on by party lines. My family's small business had our health care coverage canceled as a result of Obamacare. This is a story I hear across the district. We need bipartisan health care reform to lower costs, improve quality, and increase accessibility, especially in our rural communities.
And Candidate Wolf.
Thank you very much. Indeed, jobs in the economy are the most important thing all of us can be focusing on. And I think there's some really promising things that we're seeing, especially in some of our heritage trades. We're seeing small-scale agriculture have a big revival here in the Champlain Valley. We're seeing forestry repurposed to provide feedstock for cutting-edge biofuels. So I really think that the emphasis on renewables is a good idea. We already lead the state in our consumption of renewable energy. We're producing 30% of New York State's renewable energy right now. But we do need to find incentives for doing that. And my opponent, Elise Stefanik, has come out against federal support for renewables. She says we don't want to pick winners, but she hasn't come out against subsidies for big oil companies. I think that may be because they're in part helping to finance her campaign. But these are things that we need to do right now, and we need to rebuild our infrastructure. I think it's essential that we have a revenue stream for doing that, and I'm the only candidate that's proposed how to raise the revenue to do that.
If I can, just to answer to the accusations from Aaron Wolf.
Is this going to be the way that we do this?
No, I think we're going to move on to our next question.
Sure.
Where? Yes.
If we could, there's been a lot of chatter and some television advertising, as our viewers have noticed, about the issue of carpetbagging in this race. And I'm wondering if we could clear this up once and for all. What community do you maintain your primary residence? And were you eligible to vote in this congressional district in the last election 2 years ago? And for that, let's start with Ms. Stefanik.
Willsboro, New York is where my residence is. My family's had a home there since I was 3 years old. I'm a proud resident. Upstate New York is part of my upbringing. I was born in St. Peter's Hospital in Albany County. I was eligible to vote in the 20th Congressional District in the 2012 election.
Mr. Wolf.
My family's had a home in Elizabethtown, New York since 1968. Matt, in the last debate, talked about how, you know, all of us have a right to be running for this office. All of us have a connection to the district. I thought it was magnanimous.
I was lying.
But I also think that he was wrong on some level, that it really does matter. These connections do matter. And, you know, I'm proud to say, as I said in my opening, that I've been involved in numerous community efforts over the years. The things I most value about myself I learned in the North Country. How to work with my hands, how to change my oil, how to shoot a gun. I think these skills are part and parcel of what makes us so capable here and why we have such a sense of community. I think those are the skills that will serve me well as the congressman representing this district.
Can we be clear that you, where were you registered to vote in the last federal election?
My primary residence is Elizabethtown, New York. I did not vote in Elizabethtown in the last election, but I would have been eligible to do so as somebody who pays taxes in this district.
Mr. Funicello.
I will start off by saying I was registered in Queensbury, New York, which is just north of Glens Falls, a suburb, if you will, even though as a town it is older than Glens Falls. I will also repeat the magnanimous words I said before. Aaron and Elise are human beings. I think that their claims to the area, whether they are tenuous or tangible, it's almost irrelevant when you put it next to the issue that matters. I will say my tangible claim is I was born in Wilton, New York, which is in the district currently and was in District 20 prior. I will say that I have maintained residence in the district for all of my adult life and much of my life as a child and a teenager. I will say that my family still does have residence here. I have 4 brothers who live within the district. What I will also say, though, is that when people are trying to buy a congressional seat, that's what disturbs me, not necessarily that their ties to the area are tenuous. And with both of these candidates, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them as people. I'm saying Congress is supposed to be a unique cacophony of voices that shows what is unique about us.
Let's talk about North Country roads and New York roads. The state DOT rates half of New York's roads as poor, but the state DOT gets half of its funding from the Federal Highway Trust Fund, which is going to be broke pretty soon. How would you shore up the Federal Highway Trust Fund, and would you be willing to raise the gas tax beyond where it is now in order to do so? And we'll begin with you, Mr. Wolf.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked this question. Infrastructure is something that's been a focus of our campaign. It's been something I've been working on for years, long before I decided to run for this seat. We need to address our infrastructure. We have gotten a D+ from the American Society of Civil Engineers. And that's not just roads and bridges or water and sewer. It's also digital infrastructure. It's also having a grid that can work with the kind of distributed generation we're producing here in this district. But to pay for that, we need to talk about raising revenue. I repeat, I'm the only candidate in this race that has come up with a series of a portfolio of options for raising revenue. Those would include stopping the offshoring and inversions at $59 billion a year, capping at 28% the deductions that America's wealthiest taxpayers now deduct from their taxes. That would get us another $40 billion. What about the Buffett rule? $7 to $9 billion, a very reasonable proposal. I don't think we have to raise the gas tax when we have so many options for raising revenue. The unfortunate truth is my opponent, her hands are tied and she cannot make these proposals.
Okay, let's have Mr. Funicello answer the same question.
First and foremost, I would like to say it took a lot of effort as a third-party candidate to get on the ballot, and I would really appreciate it, Aaron, if you would address me as your opponent as well, because I am.
Indeed.
Thank you.
I shall.
As far as the issue of highway funding goes, we have a tax reform issue here. If we're going to talk about how can you allocate funds to do something that is important to all of us as a collective, we need to first understand something simple about our economy, and that's that we're $17 trillion in debt. So maybe we just have a problem with the funds not being diverted properly. If we're having a problem with highway funding coming through from the federal government and the state government, or if we're having a problem fixing our rail systems. I would suggest that we stop subsidizing oil companies, not necessarily raising the gas tax on individual consumers and workers. We are taxed enough already. I would suggest that we stop subsidizing the payrolls of large corporations like McDonald's or Walmart. I would suggest we stop economic development in the form of giving GE money for free out of the Federal Reserve so we can lend it to other mechanisms through GE Capital. Thank you.
The Highway Trust Fund and infrastructure in our country is an opportunity to work on a bipartisan basis. This is likely to come up and be one of the initial key issues in the next Congress. And it's an opportunity, I hope, to be able to work across the aisle, similarly to, I think, how Congressman Owens would have worked. The key issues when I think about infrastructure is we need to have a long-term infrastructure plan in this country. Washington has too many short-term stopgap measures that doesn't allow long-term economic growth and long-term economic planning. Infrastructure is more than just our roads. Our trucks are on, my family's business trucks are on the roads 5 days out of the week. But it's also our sewers, it's our waterways, it's rural broadband. We need to make sure that we have the infrastructure to compete in a 21st century economy. I agree with Matt Funicello that we need to address our federal spending to make sure that we're reining in our debt so that we can have long-term infrastructure spending. And I also agree in terms of, you know, Matt pointed out oil subsidies. The only candidate in this race who has nearly $1 million in big oil is my Democratic opponent, Aaron Wolf, who wants to raise your taxes. This is not the time for increasing taxes on hardworking families.
Okay, well, let's get on to the next question now, which has to do with student debt, which is at an all-time high in the United States. And it's a massive, massive problem for families. What is your plan to help more kids go to college more affordably? And we will start with Matt Funicello.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. My son is at a SUNY school right now. He goes to SUNY Canton, and he is studying auto engineering and mechanics, and he's paying quite a lot of money to do that. As many people in the working class, most of the funding I have probably saved over the last 10 or 15 years hoping to help him with college is no longer there. We've had to spend it on other things. We are living in austerity times, as we know from our wonderful Democratic governor. What I wonder all the time, much as people wonder when they're driving on the Thruway, which is a toll road we built with public money, and we seem to be doing it over and over again, is didn't we build our public university system, and how many times do we need to pay for the education our children are supposed to get from within it? And the answer to me is that they should be getting a free college education. Many industrialized nations around the world do this. If we don't start talking about it at the congressional level, it will never occur. It will simply never happen. If we do start understanding that diversion of funds that are going to corporate America could pay for that education, it's never going to happen.
Elise Stefanik, same question.
Sure, so I think student loans need to be assessed on a bipartisan basis, and I support President Obama's legislation that he signed with the help of Republicans, capping student loan rates so that they're on track with U.S. Treasuries. While my Democratic opponent was still in Manhattan, I was visiting with students across this district at SUNY Plattsburgh, at SUNY Canton, at SUNY Potsdam, Clarkson, St. Lawrence. We are blessed to have some of the best universities in the country, and I've heard firsthand how challenging it is for students to plan right after they graduate to pay off those student loans, which is why I'm focused on also ensuring that we have jobs for our graduates. So I think there's opportunities to work on a local level with businesses, partnering with Clinton County Community College, for example, to make sure that we have vocational and training programs that work with our economy today. But I also think we need to address the rising cost of colleges so that hardworking families can afford to send their kids to college, because right now it's out of reach for so many of our families in the North Country.
Well, when my Republican opponent was still living in Washington, which wasn't very long ago, I was researching a project about the looming student debt crisis. This is an example of the kind of work I did before I ran for Congress, which was to look at the ways that policies affect people. We've got a $1.2 trillion debt load now with students. This is a looming economic crisis that could be akin to the mortgage defaults if we begin to default on these loans. But the biggest crisis of all is when we propose a cap, such as that Elise Stefanik has just mentioned, along with Obama. We're not talking about allowing students to refinance, the ones that are carrying the debt load, to refinance according to those levels. And I think that's a really key and important distinction. According to the Warren proposal, which I embrace and endorse, students would be able to refinance loans with those debt loads and get them at the levels of the cap that Ms. Stefanik is talking about. Why is that important? It's important because the students now that are carrying loads of hundreds of thousands of dollars are not, and the former students are not able to get married. They're not able to start a family. They're not able to invest in North Country businesses. That's a big cost to our economy.
Next question about the environment. A number of environmental groups in the Champlain Valley are concerned about the influx of train cars carrying crude oil, including tar sands oil, and they travel, as you know, right along the Lake Champlain shoreline. Many of us remember the disaster up in Quebec just last summer. I'm asking each of you if you would tell us how you feel about transporting crude oil in this manner and how it informs your view about combating climate change. Ms. Stefanik, let's begin with you.
So this is absolutely an issue that's important to our towns and villages across the district. Those trains actually go through Willsboro and along the lakeshore frontage. So it's an environmental issue, but it's also an economic issue, which is why I support lowering the speeds and having further regulations so that these are regulated and it's safe transport. It's also why I support pipeline. This president has blocked the Keystone Pipeline at every turn. We need to legalize the Keystone Pipeline. It's why I support the pipeline between Vermont and International Paper. It allows safe transport. And I also think at the congressional level, there's an opportunity to have someone full-time on congressional staff working with FEMA in case that there is an accident so that you have immediate access to Washington and immediate response time, because our local communities, our fire departments don't have the resources to pursue the cleanup if something were to happen. We need to make sure that at the federal level we are a helping hand to do so.
Mr. Wolf.
Well, I'm in favor of the natural gas pipeline that would go across Lake Champlain to help provide jobs at International Paper. But I think that's a very different issue than the oil trains, which are now being, we've got Bakken crude oil, which is among the most volatile oil in the world. In fact, no fire that's ever been started with that crude oil has ever been extinguished. You have to wait to let the fires burn out. It's that dangerous and that inflammable. We don't have the first responders who are ready, and I don't think that Washington is going to help us in the moment of an emergency.
Financially, providing resources at the congressional level.
You've interrupted me several times. You did that in the last debate. Is that representative of the way you're going to work in Washington?
It's not, but I do think that when you're mischaracterizing my positions, it's
We're going to have an
important.
opportunity for you all to shoot questions at each other, so
let's
let Mr. Wolf continue.
I agree with Senator Gillibrand that we need to move immediately to ban the DOT Type 111 cars. We need to have stepped up federal inspections of the infrastructure of the CSX track running along the Champlain Valley, and we also really need to make sure that our first responders are trained. One of the best ways to do that would be to work with veterans that have gotten this training in the military and give them jobs training our first responders along the railroad.
And Mr. Funicello.
The Megantic disaster was absolutely that, because there was a huge loss of human life. Just a day or so ago, there was a derailment in, I believe, Aliceville, Alabama, in which 2.7 million gallons of this type of oil were being carried, and there was a derailment. Now, 25 of those 90 cars spilled. As Mr. Wolf was just saying, they actually have to wait until the burning is over and until they remove the rest of the carloads before they actually know how much oil was spilled into that area. This is not only an environmental catastrophe waiting to happen and already happening, it isn't safe because of the possible loss of human life in the Adirondack Park. I'm 100% against the Keystone XL pipeline, not because this is a transitional issue. I am against the DOT 111s. I am for us buying oil from the countries that have oil and are pumping it out for now. As we begin a fossil fuel transition, it should be towards something new. We need to have a vision, as we did when we made the moon landing, that we can do something differently. How about a full transition, 100% to renewables by 2030? That's the green position. Let's do it.
Well, I want to talk about a disparity in wealth. Mr. Wolf, you mentioned Warren Buffett a moment ago. He talks about the fact that his secretary pays a higher income tax rate than he does. He thinks that's ridiculous. Yeah. He would like Congress to take action on that matter. And I address this question to all of you, and we'll start with you, Mr. Wolf. If you were in Congress, would you be willing to take up this issue as Mr. Buffett would wish you to?
Look, I think one of the things that we really need to do is make sure that people have talked a long time about this kind of approach as redistributing wealth. I think that's an incorrect characterization. What we want to do is distribute opportunity. We've got 50 of the largest corporations in America. 25 of them pay no taxes at all. Your reference to the Buffett rule, I think, is a really apt one. I am the only candidate that's embraced the Buffett rule. I think it's really essential that for individuals, and where that line is drawn, it's essential that individuals who are making $5 million, $6 million, $7 million a year pay a higher tax rate than the middle class. I think that's axiomatic. That could provide revenues for our general fund, and it could begin to make sure that the opportunity is distributed more to the middle class.
All right, we pose the same question to Mr. Funicello.
Interestingly, there are a number of issues that Greens and Libertarians agree on, and conservatives and liberals do too. The idea of a flat tax has been put forward many times, and most people on the left, or most people who consider themselves liberal, are against a flat tax, feeling it's regressive. It wouldn't have to be regressive if you were talking about a $15 living wage and everyone having single-payer health care. We could get rid of an income tax, which we already know is arguably unconstitutional. You are not supposed to tax labor. We have made all kinds of provisos to change that so that the people who work for a living in this country are being taxed to the tune of 25 or 30%. This is untenable to me. What we can do is have a consumption tax. The consumption tax could be about 10%. You would then see a need to have a wealth tax to accompany that. That would probably be about 1.3%. It would give us roughly the same amount of revenue we're bringing in right now from all other forms of taxation. You could eliminate those. It would eliminate all the unnecessary complication. It would also eliminate the loopholes that corporate America and the ruling class are employing, so they don't pay any taxes at all.
Ms. Stefano.
I believe in tax fairness, which is why I'm the only candidate who wants to throw out the tax code completely and start from scratch with a common sense tax code that's flatter, fairer, and simpler, so that hardworking families can file their own taxes, because over 80% of Americans rely on outside tax help. My Democratic opponent, Aaron Wolf, is the only multimillionaire in this race. He's a multimillionaire from Manhattan, and he's failed to release his own taxes. I'm proud to have, like other members across the aisle, Senator Gillibrand and Senator Schumer, to have released my taxes so that voters have the transparency and the accountability. I plan to do that while in Congress, but I don't support tax hikes. My opponent supports raising taxes on hardworking families. We have a spending problem in this country, not a taxing problem.
Well, that concludes the portion where we're going to ask questions of all of the candidates, and arguably this is when it gets interesting. This is when the candidates get to pose questions to each other. Each candidate can pick another candidate and ask a question. They have 30 seconds. That candidate has a minute to answer, and then the candidate asking the question gets 30 seconds to respond. And we are going to begin with Mr. Funicello. You pick first.
Will I have an opportunity to ask both candidates or just one?
You'll get to pose the question to each candidate, yes.
Okay. Initially, I would like to ask Elise a question, and that is, quite regularly you are talking about the issue with the ACA affecting your family business, and about you losing health care or having the prices increased to a point that was untenable. I've experienced that as a small business person, and my workers have as well. But what would you say to the roughly 80 million of us who are either uninsured or underinsured about what is the Republican answer to this? I mean, is it health savings accounts, really?
No,
or can we have some of our 60 cents back we're already subsidizing the system with?
It's a great question, Matt. I think too often in Washington, people aren't putting forth their own solutions. My goal would be to lower health care costs so they're more affordable, both for individuals and small businesses, to improve quality and increase accessibility. And my plan for doing that, and I hope to work on a bipartisan basis, is to allow health care to be purchased across state lines. That would help lower costs. Vermont is right across the state border. It makes sense. Also pursuing tort reform. As I've talked to physicians across the district and rural hospitals, the medical malpractice costs are rising extremely fast. We need to have a discussion about tort reform. And then I think we need to address those with preconditions that they have access to health care. And I think the way you can do that is by having state high-risk insurance pools. But it's a great question. It's something that small business owners raise throughout the district.
And I apologize. I don't think I made myself clear. Everybody gets 30 seconds to respond to this,
okay.
And I didn't make that clear.
Well, I would just like to respond to some of my Republican opponents' ideas about health care. This idea that under Stefanacare we would somehow be able to buy health insurance across state lines. Well, we already can do that under the Affordable Care Act. And I think one of the problems is that when we do that, especially where we're in a state like New York that has higher standards for patient care and we have states competing with the New York plan, we're going to have a race to the bottom, and we're going to have lower standards for the health care that we purchase. I think one of the challenging issues here is the fact that under the Affordable Care Act, we are seeing the lowest rise in health care spending ever since this statistic has been measured. Health care costs are rising in this country lower than the rate of inflation. So it's important that that be known.
Might I rebut that?
Yes,
Yes.
in the 30 seconds.
I would just like to say very simply this, that when you look at a country like Canada, Canada is paying 50 cents on the dollar to what we pay for health care. That's not a rising health care cost. That's half of what we spend per person with universal care. Neither of these parties, neither of these candidates have an answer. Remember, 60 cents of every dollar spent on health care is already your money and mine. We're already paying for health care, we're just not getting it. Every other country in the world has it. Canadians live 3 years longer, they have less of an obesity rate, they have less of an infant mortality rate, and yeah, you'll find a Canadian who will complain about their health care. You'll also find a lot of Americans, including me, who will complain far more loudly.
And Elise Stefanik gets the last word on this issue.
Oh, it sounds like my Democratic opponent, Aaron Wolf, is embracing the Affordable Care Act 100%. It is clear as you travel this district, whether you're talking to seniors who are seeing cuts, whether you're talking to small businesses who have had their health care coverage canceled, or whether you're talking to individuals. So if Aaron Wolf wants to support Obamacare, that's his decision to do so. I think we need to not only make immediate fixes to Obamacare, but we need a new direction to help lower health care costs.
Could I respond to that?
Well, Mr. Wolf, you actually have the next question, so you may choose who you'd like to ask a question to.
And I can only ask one question, or I can ask a question to each of them?
Each of us.
You can ask one question,
The
and
same
both will
question.
respond to the same question.
Huh. Well, I've planned 2 separate questions.
That's a fine mess you've gotten us into.
Yeah, I did too. It's okay.
Me too.
I'll begin with you then. Listen, you had this press conference that seemed like kind of a nightmare from your perspective. You invited the press, they started asking questions, and it seemed like only 6 minutes into it, you split. My question would be, what were the questions that provoked that reaction? Why did you leave? And do you embrace Paul Ryan's idea to voucherize Medicare? It seemed like that was one of the things that was maybe going to come up.
Well, Aaron, your campaign seems like a nightmare. When you announced your candidacy, you hid from the press for a month and a half and said you were a press release kind of guy. I've made myself very available on a variety of issues. And when it comes to the Ryan budget, I said on the primary debate stage in my first debate that I would have voted no. I believe that when it comes to Social Security, we need to protect and preserve these programs, not only for seniors of today, but for future generations. So, unlike you, I want to actually work across the aisle to fix these programs. This is what's wrong with Washington. This is what people are tired of, is the negative partisan attacks. And I hope to be able to work across the aisle to solve these issues.
If I might respond as well. The reason why I left the press conference, oh, wait a minute. No, that wasn't me. Essentially, the question borders on Social Security, so I will answer the question about Social Security. What I would do is I would affect H.R. 1029, or at least become a sponsor of it, and attempt to advocate for it, which raises the tax cap from $117,000 of income to $250,000 of income. Basically is a loophole that currently exists that allows us to underfund our own Social Security. And I'm saying let's not privatize it, let's not voucherize it or Medicare. They're programs we pay for as workers. Let's just make sure it is secured for the future. H.R. 1029 secures it for the foreseeable future.
And you get the final word, Mr. Wolf.
The final word on Social Security for me is that I don't trust Washington bureaucrats to do even what Matt Funicello is proposing. This is a solemn pact with the voters of the North Country, with the citizens of the United States. This is one of the most socially responsible pieces of legislation we have ever passed. I will not change Social Security. I will make sure that it is solvent by growing the economy. I will help pass comprehensive immigration reform, which will add $30 billion to the Social Security Trust Fund annually. These are the steps we need to take, but no changes now because I don't trust Washington.
Candidate Stefanik, would you like to rebut?
Sure. I think this is an example of Aaron Wolf peddling partisan talking points and not putting forth solutions. As I said, when Aaron Wolf accused my campaign on the press issues, Aaron Wolf has been the least transparent candidate in this race, the least accessible to local media outlets, the candidate who said he runs his campaigns by press releases. He's a press release kind of guy and didn't speak to the media for the first month and a half. For 15 months, I've been working hard traveling this district, talking about my commitment to protecting Social Security and Medicare for our seniors and for future generations, so no changes.
I would like to
keep
just
talking
refer-
because you get to ask the next question.
Sure. My next question is actually to you, Matt.
Oh, no.
It's a two-part question. The first part
Wait a minute.
It's lighthearted. The first part is lighthearted. You make really great bread. What's the secret sauce? And then the second part of the question is, can you please explain to the viewers this evening why you think Aaron Wolf should drop out of this race?
Oh my gosh. I have to be honest, Elise. First of all, the way we make great bread is with time. There's no question about that. We make naturally leavened bread, and it takes a very long time to make it, up to 20 hours from start to finish.
Wow.
And it's made with love. Not by everybody who works for me. We are very working class. We do drink some beer and watch some NASCAR occasionally. There is a little bit of anger at 2 o'clock in the morning with no sleep. But to answer your second question, I'm not sure I'm just calling on Aaron to drop out of the race. Why don't you drop out too?
I'm not going to drop out, Matt.
I ask that only, it is lighthearted, but it's not lighthearted too. The reality is we have an opportunity right here at this exact point in time. You have a third-party candidate on the ballot in a congressional race. You usually vote Democrat or Republican. Why are you doing that? We've been doing this my entire lifetime. How's that working for us? What's the legislation you like? Can you name a single piece of it? This is the problem with Washington. Real human beings run, but they're running with people's money from outside the district. We have to stop them from doing that. Both of them. And the only way you're going to do that is if you vote for me. It's an historic opportunity. Please take it. Be brave.
Well, Matt, you have said recently that you, if you were elected to Congress, you would refuse to caucus either with the Republicans or the Democrats. That means Matt would refuse to work with either party. It would be a protest vote. And I think that that's not what we need here in the New York 21st. What we need is somebody who is willing to work across the aisle. I'm the only candidate up here who's not driven by a conservative or a liberal ideology. And I think Matt Funicello's idea about being the only Green in Congress is wonderful in the abstract. It's not good for the New York 21st.
I definitely would like an opportunity to rebut that. Yes?
Yes.
Essentially, you have to ask yourself this. What happens when you elect a Democrat or Republican other than that they join their major party in being a backbencher? They become totally irrelevant as a congressional representative. That's what's going to happen when you elect Elise or Aaron to some degree. What I'm going to do is be able to advocate to the national media for these issues that are important to workers in the middle class. Single-payer health care, $15 living wage, ending corporate welfare, green jobs. These are things that exist everywhere else in the world. We can do them here too. We just have to have the vision and the courage to actually make this happen. We can do it. You elect Aaron, you're not going to see him do any of the things he's saying. He's just going to be a hired vote.
And Ms. Stefanik, you get a chance to ask a question again.
Okay, so we are doing both candidates.
Oh, I
Okay,
see.
so my question now is for Aaron, and it's about foreign policy, so it's shifted in what we were discussing, but increasingly voters are seeing foreign policy in the news. And my question is, do you support President Obama's decision to establish a red line in Syria and then not enforce that red line? And what do you think the consequences of that decision are?
I think President Obama has failed in his Syria policy, and I think he has failed in his ability to help contain the Ebola crisis. These are things that are extremely important. The United States, as we're seeing with the Ebola crisis, as we're seeing with ISIS, the United States has an important role in the world, a leadership role, and I don't think that he has expressed leadership on these two issues. I'd like to specifically say, with respect to Ebola, this was an opportunity for the United States to step in to help contain a disease which is now threatening Americans at home. With respect to Syria, the President did not work in concert with other nations. I think there are Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, all have strong standing armies. We should be working in concert with them. What I'm worried about, though, with Ms. Stefanik is that she has been such a powerful advocate for boots on the ground in her capacity as a director of the Foreign Policy Initiative. I think that's something that we have to be incredibly careful of, and her hawkish record on foreign policy doesn't make me feel any better than the president's.
Mr. Funicello.
I would like to say first and foremost, I'm not a fan of Barack Obama's presidency, as I was not a fan of George W. Bush's either. That might come as no surprise. But I'm not going to blame Barack Obama for the situation with ISIS or for the Ebola virus. That's patently ridiculous. A president is a glorified sales representative for the corporations that put him or her in office. That's it. So what I'm saying to you is, why don't we look at the actual HRs? HR 2057, sponsored by Justin Amash, who is a Republican, is really simple, and it's that we go back to the constitutional laws of our country. We no longer allow for authorizations to use military force. We have Congress straight up debate whether or not we're going to war, and then they have a vote. That's how it's supposed to work.
And Ms. Stefanik, you can weigh in here.
Sure. So foreign policy issues are extremely important in this country and in New York's 21st District. Aaron Wolf has just demonstrated that he lacks an understanding. The red line in Syria was established by President Obama if Assad were to use chemical weapons. Assad used chemical weapons on Syrian people, and there was no consequences. We are in this position today with a rising ISIS because of President Obama's failed leadership. The question wasn't about Ebola, Aaron. The question was about President Obama's failed foreign policy, and specifically the red line in Syria. I believe that we need to be working with our allies. I also believe that we need to be listening to our military commanders who are the experts and give the best advice about what our policy should be in the Middle East.
We can engage on this.
Yeah, I'd like to. I mean, obviously, I know what the red line is. I know what the use is. And obviously, I didn't say I'm a press release kind of guy. Your whole strategy, it seems to me, is to repeat things and repeat things and repeat things over and over again. This is the entire spin machine that's been working with the Stefanik campaign in order to get them to saturate. She says, if I link myself to Owens, if I link my opponent to Obama over and over again, that's a strategy. But what it does is it distracts from the real issues. It distracts from the fact that my opponent has failed to take a stand on the minimum wage. She's failed to take a stand on Paul Ryan's idea to voucherize Medicare. These are the things that the voters in this district want to know.
Aaron, I know your campaign is fledgling. I know that you're frustrated.
Fledgling?
It is fledgling. I've spent the past 15 months traveling this district, listening to voters, and sharing my opinions. On the issues that you just laid out, I've been very specific. I'm open to raising the minimum wage as long as small businesses have a seat at the table. In terms of Social Security and the Ryan budget, I would have voted no. I'm running to put forth my own solutions. And if you travel around this district and talk to the hundreds and thousands of people that I've met with, I've outworked you in this campaign, and I'm going to outwork you as the next representative in Congress if I earn the support.
Yeah, I don't like that kind of petty personal stuff, but it's really characterized the Stefanik campaign and their way of operating in the national press. I don't know exactly what you mean when you say small business doesn't have a seat at the table. We've been discussing this for 2 years in Congress.
Actually, right here.
A recent survey, a national survey, said that 67% of small businesses were in favor of raising the minimum wage. Mitt Romney's in favor of raising the minimum wage. Bill O'Reilly is in favor of raising the minimum wage. I mean, these are the natural allies for my opponent, and it's surprising that she keeps punting on this question because small business has been at the table and small business has embraced this idea. We need to give Americans a raise, and we need to give our consumers a raise.
Might I
Mr.
rebut that?
Funicello, please.
Very simply, let's look at it this way. The Democrats like to call us their friends. They put their arm around us in the working class, and they pet our hair, and they say, oh, poor worker. What they also do is then they give us something that isn't real. $10.10 an hour is just enough to get you off of Medicaid. It's just enough to get you out of subsidized housing. Just enough to get you off of food stamps. So it's a Republican initiative. It's a Mitt Romney plan, just like the ACA. Has nothing to do with common sense for workers. We need an actual raise. $15 an hour in single-payer health care, I'm on board. Until the Democrats advocate for that, they sure couldn't be my party. As a small business person, I advocate that the same way Henry Ford did. You're going to pay your people enough that they can buy the products that you produce. It's a quintessentially American thought process. These two parties don't have it.
On the minimum wage, since this is a new issue, I'm proud that my family's business pays $14.50 and up. I commend Matt Funicello for paying his employees $15 and up. The candidate on this stage who pays less than the minimum wage he is advocating for is Aaron Wolf, who pays $10. So I hope you give your workers a raise after this election.
It is Mr. Wolf's turn for another question.
Well, I'd like very much to respond to that. I am a minority partner in this business. I cannot unilaterally make that decision about raising wages. I am in a very different business than both Ms. Stefanik's family and Matt Funicello. But I do think that getting at least close to the minimum wage, I pay 25% above the minimum wage now. I think we need to get to 1010. Look, it's a step. It's a step. I think Matt Funicello makes excellent points. I think he envisions a society...
Don't make me say vote for me again in this debate,
I think he makes important points that are important goals, but the fact is, we need to take incremental steps. Elise Stefanik refuses to take any step in that direction, and incremental steps are the way that we need a pragmatist to work.
Get back on track, we need your next question, sir, to your candidate.
My next question to you is, what constitutes bringing small business to the table? If you are in favor of having a conversation, and I haven't been in politics nearly as long as Ms. Stefanik has, but I've learned that when you don't want to answer, you say, I'd like to have a conversation about that. It's a way of punting. It's a way of kicking the can down the road. So my question with minimum wage is, what constitutes bringing small business to the table if 67% of small businesses have already said that they're in favor of raising the minimum wage?
We've seen what happens when small businesses don't have a seat at the table. If you look at Obamacare, legislation that was passed by a single party, without small businesses' input, without working on a bipartisan basis, it doesn't work, and it hurts small businesses in this country and in the 21st Congressional District. We have an economy here that has summer opportunities. We have high school students that have jobs during the summers. We have college kids who have jobs. I want to make sure that the minimum wage, when we talk about raising the minimum wage, it fits our economy here. But I want to reiterate, and these are for Aaron Wolf's workers in Brooklyn, that you deserve a raise, and I hope one of the outcomes of this campaign is that after November 4th, you get the raise that you've earned, because as I've said, our family business is proud to pay $4.50 and above. Matt Funicello, he acts like he talks. He pays $15 to his workers. Aaron Wolf has lost credibility on this issue because he doesn't even pay his employees the wage that he is advocating for.
Actually, it's Mr. Funicello's chance now. So.
Two very important points, if I could rebut that. And I know this is taking up even more time. I don't pay $15 an hour. I pay $12 to $20 an hour to my production staff, and I don't make $20 an hour. There are actually 3 people who work for me who make more. I feel the need to throw that out there. I do not want misinformation out there in any way whatsoever. As a small business person, I don't believe that the Chamber of Commerce and the NFIB represent me. They represent franchises. They represent Walmart. There's a truth to this. Small businesses already pay their workers more than franchises do. And the franchises are dictating how and when we are going to either increase our minimum wage or not. It shouldn't be up to them. It should be up to workers what they are going to allow as their rate. Voting is the way to decide that.
$10 is a starting wage at my business. There are many workers there that earn more. What I think is really important is that we come to a national consensus about that. If Elise Stefanik is elected on November 4th, she won't just be representing the employees of Premium Plywood. She'll be representing all the employees in this district. And it's really important that she understand that passing the minimum wage is one of the most important and effective ways we can grow our economies.
And that's why I think small businesses in this district should have a seat at the table. That's why I have my position that I'm open to raising the minimum wage. As long as small businesses...
What would constitute a seat at the table?
It's what they didn't have for Obamacare. It's what President Obama has forced through. And Speaker Pelosi, the party that you will caucus with if you're elected, they don't give small businesses a seat at the table when they pass legislation. I will, and that's my commitment to small businesses and workers across this district.
Well, now it's Mr. Funicello's opportunity to...
To ask another question? Oh my goodness. Aaron, I want to ask a question I hope you do not take umbrage at, but it's an important question, and it talks to the point I've been making over and over again, which is I don't believe that people of means are bad people. What I do believe is we already have enough of them in Congress. Everyone in Congress is a millionaire or better. It's time to have workers at the table, which you're both running against me, so that's okay. You're saying it's all right to have people with means there exclusively. I want people to know more about you as a person and a candidate. How much is your home in Elizabethtown worth? To give people an idea.
You know, it's hard to give an exact value. A lot of the building I did myself. I milled the boards myself.
What's it appraised at?
you know,
What are your property taxes per year? Some indicator
I actually,
of how
I
you
actually
are
know the
living.
value that Ms. Stefanik's home is appraised at, but I feel
Then
like,
say that. Say that and yours too. Please share that with us.
look, there's only one candidate here who's got a $1.5 million condominium in Washington.
Actually,
DC.
there's only one candidate here who has a one-bedroom apartment in the Glens Falls area.
You know what?
That he rents.
I think Matt's point is important, and his point is that there is far too much money in politics. And, you know, having money is one of the things that is relatively new to me. I grew up in a middle-class family with professors as parents, but I got to say, I think one of the things that's really, really important is that when you do have some money, and I do not embrace the fact that money has taken on such a huge role in politics, I'm very proud of the fact that in the last quarter reporting, I have more donors than Ms. Stefanik, I have more New York State donors than Ms. Stefanik, I have more in-district donors than Ms. Stefanik. But I cannot be bought in the same way that the Karl Roves and the people that are funding Ms. Stefanik's, all the support structure for Ms. Stefanik's campaign, they're investing and they want a return on their investment.
That'll have to be the last word, though.
Sure. Aaron Wolf is the only multimillionaire in this race. He has put in over $500,000 to this campaign. I've outraised you both with donors in New York State, donors in the district, and amount raised. I have to work hard to raise the money. You're just writing your campaign a check and funding the majority of this. Aaron, you're a Manhattan multimillionaire. Voters understand that in this district. We need someone who has an understanding of what the challenges of small businesses are. So with all due respect, take a look at your personal financial disclosure and compare it to the two other candidates, because there's only one multimillionaire from Manhattan running for office, and it's Aaron Wolf.
You may respond, sir.
Look, having money, again, is, I have worked very hard to raise money. I've certainly out-fundraised my opponent in the quarters that I've been raising money for this race. But I think one of the things that's most important is the fact that I do not have these Wall Street billionaires like she does investing in her candidacy in ways that cannot be traced. If you want to know who's donated to my campaign, you can go to the FEC website. We provide a link on my website, and you can see exactly who has donated. In Stefanik's case, there are shadowy super PACs who do not have to reveal their donors. I think this is one of the most significant and one of the most scary aspects of money in politics, is that these IEs do not have to say. And Ms. Stefanik, you know, is benefiting from an enormous investment of very wealthy people.
And you're on, Mr. Funicello.
I would just like to remark that the thing that both Elise Stefanik and Aaron Wolf share very much in common is, as of the last FEC disclosure, you're looking at 70% of their money coming from outside of the congressional district. Whether it came out of Aaron's pocket or whether it came from Karl Rove and Paul Ryan is almost irrelevant to me. The fact is that's not grassroots campaigning inside your district. 90% of my money is from inside CD21.
I think you've worked hard, Matt. I think you've run a tremendous campaign. I'm proud of the grassroots
Are
support.
you asking me to drop out?
No.
It sounds like there's going to be a button there.
No, but I've run an aggressive grassroots campaign. If you look at my small dollar donors, I've raised more money in the district than Aaron Wolf has, who's self-funding his campaign.
I'm going to stop you there and just let all three of the candidates know that we need to tighten up our answers. We are running out of time and have a lot more to get to.
To that end, we've got 30 seconds to respond to these direct questions that we're going to pose to each of you individually. And we're going to start with you, Mr. Wolf. Agriculture, obviously very important in this district. What needs to change in terms of environmental and immigration law to help agriculture in the 21st district?
Well, in terms of environmental law, I think there has been some overreach with some EPA regs. I do think that looking at intermittent puddles and farm ditches as navigable waterways is probably not a non-starter for a lot of farmers. But passing comprehensive immigration reform is one of the most important things we can do. We cannot have our farmers afraid to break the law to bring in their harvest. And we have, you know, an enormous dependence on both intermittent and seasonal workers for the apple industry and much more permanent workers in dairy. We have to make sure that comprehensive immigration passes and passes soon, and that would be the best thing we could do for our dairy farmers in this district.
To Mr. Funicello, turning to healthcare now, what is your plan to improve or replace the Affordable Care Act? And if you could be specific, I know we're only giving you 30 seconds, though.
Very simple. H.R. 676, it is improved, expanded Medicare for all. The ACA is a brutal anti-worker bill, similar to raising people to $10.10 an hour. It's mandatory for-profit health insurance. It's not removing profit from health insurance. We already pay in public money, as I've said before, 60 cents of every dollar. It's public money. We've already paid for our health care. We're just not getting it. So that 80 to 100 million of us need it. Single-payer health care, H.R. 676.
Finally, to Ms. Stefanik, if you're sworn in as the 21st District's next Congresswoman and the President comes and asks, will you support him putting boots on the ground if the fight against ISIS doesn't go so well, even if it includes another deployment by the Fort Drum 10th Mountain Division?
I think that is the most difficult vote that any member of Congress will take. I would seek out the military commanders at Fort Drum to ask for their advice. I would talk to the soldiers directly, which I've done over the course of this campaign, before I cast any vote. But I do think President Obama needs to have a stronger foreign policy, because we're in this situation today because of his failed leadership. So that would be a vote, I think, that would be extraordinarily difficult to make. But I do think we shouldn't be taking options off the table if our military commanders believe that that's the best approach.
All right, time for closing statements, and Mr. Wolf, we begin with you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a tremendous honor to be here again, and thank you to both of you for the spirited exchange. I'm very proud of what I've seen crisscrossing the district. I'm proud of the promise we've seen in our economy, whether it's the agricultural revival or small-scale manufacturing beginning to succeed, in large part due to some of the efforts of Congressman Owens. I'm very, very proud of that, and I think we have immense promise in this district. But the 2010 census revealed what so many of us already felt and feared, which is that we were losing our young people. And that's why my candidacy has been focused from day one on jobs in the economy, jobs in the economy. And I think that's one of the most important things we need to do, invest in our infrastructure, and provide tax breaks. I'm the only one who's talked about concrete tax breaks for small business. But how to pay for that is extremely important, and no other candidate is talking about raising revenue. I've come up with a package of raising $130 billion a year. We need that to pay for things. The other candidates have talked about investments, but they haven't done it. I want to carry those real common sense solutions to Washington. Thank you.
You're on, Mr. Funicello.
I'd like to say a couple simple things about the agenda. I would like to say green jobs. We had a WPA. It worked. We had a federal government that employed anyone who wanted a job who was able-bodied to do work for the federal government, serving in the collective good. Lots of wonderful things came out of it. Single-payer health care. We already pay for health care. We're just being denied it. That's called theft, so we need to have single-payer health care. $15 living wage. We can have wage-led growth in this country if we'll pay workers what they deserve. We also need to end corporate welfare. That's an awfully good way to do it. Elevate workers. 8% of Americans approve of the job Congress is doing right now. I would just ask, is electing another corporate candidate, another candidate with corporate sponsorship, going to fix that problem? You usually vote Democrat or Republican. 42% of us right now in the United States are independent voters. I'm saying this time around, vote for your kids, vote for your grandkids, vote green, be brave.
Annalise Stefanik.
This election is a choice. It's a choice between the failed policies of President Obama with higher taxes, more regulation, more expensive health care. Those are the policies that my Democratic opponent, Aaron Wolf, supports. I hope to bring new ideas and a new generation of leadership with fresh energy and independent approaches to help create jobs and grow our economy right here in the North Country for our young people, to stand up for our constitutional liberties, to always advocate on behalf of our family farmers, which are the backbone of our community in the North Country, and to always stand up for our brave servicemen and women based at Fort Drum and the veterans we have in this district. If you're looking for a new direction, if you're tired of politics as usual and career politicians, I hope to bring a new approach, and I hope to bring a new generation of leadership. And if you're looking for a leader who has the courage to put forth solutions, I hope to earn your support on November 4th.
That concludes our debate. I want to thank all of our candidates, Elise Stefanik, Aaron Wolf, and Matt Funicello, for defending democracy with us tonight. Have a great night, everybody. Highlights of this debate are posted at WPTZ.com.
Good night.